Good morning, everyone. Welcome to episode number 6 of the Binational Trade Webinar Series led by Greater Yuma Economic Development Corporation, Greater Yuma Port Authority, OPRODE in San Luis Rio, Colorado, and Forefront ED. I'm Nasser Mendez, Executive Director of Forefront ED, and I will be the presenters of this webinar. Today's topic is the USMCA and its impact on our region by Carlos Martinez, representative of CAREM and partner of COMCE, Veronica Bravo, CEO of North America for COMCE Mexico, Victor Gamas, director of COMCE in Sonora. After the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. Please feel free to submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box of this platform. Let us know where are you connecting from, please. Mensaje. Buenos días a todos. Esperamos se encuentren bien. Bienvenidos al episodio número 6 de la serie de webinars sobre comercio binacional organizada por Greater Yuma Economic Development Corporation, Port Authority, OPRODE y Forefront ED. El día de hoy seré su presentador y el tema muy importante en esta época es el impacto del Tratado de Libre Comercio o TEMEC, conocido en México, en nuestra región. Tendremos de presentadores a Carlos Martínez, representante de CAREM y socio de COMCE, Veronica Bravo, también de COMCE México, Victor Gamas de COMCE-Sonora. Después de la presentación de este grupo de gente experta en la materia, tendremos una sesión de preguntas y respuestas. Iniciamos. Gracias por acompañarnos. Adelante.
Muchas gracias, Nasser. Muchas gracias a todos mis amigos de OPRODE, de Forefront ED, de Greater Yuma Economic Development Council, de Greater Yuma Port Authority y de la ciudad de San Luis Río, Colorado. Hoy, como comenta Nasser, vamos a presentar sobre el TEMEC y sus implicaciones para nuestra región. Y es un placer estar con ustedes representando a COMCE-Sonora y a COMCE Nacional. Thank you, everybody, for your participation and for your invitation today to our meeting. We'll be doing this presentation in English on the USMCA and its impact on our region. Please know that we are bilingual and happy to answer any and all questions in Spanish when the time comes. Thank you to Yuma, thank you to San Luis Rio, Colorado, and to everybody involved in the making of this webinar. Today, we'll talk about the USMCA and its impact on our region, especially the border region from California, Baja California, Arizona, and Sonora. We'll have Carlos Martinez Gonzalez talking about the U.S.-Mexico bilateral relationship, its past, its present, and its future. He is the president of the North American Council for the Customs Brokers Association of Mexico. Veronica Bravo Polo, the director of COMCE North America, and she'll be talking about the role of the private sector in USMCA negotiations. And finally, myself, Victor Gamas, and I'll be talking about the USMCA and its future. Carlos, your microphone.
Ahora sí. Muchísimas gracias. Gracias, Víctor. Agradezco mucho a COMCE la invitación, a OPRODE, a nuestros amigos de Frontend, como decías, GIPA, Greater Yuma, San Luis Río, Colorado, a todos ustedes por estar aquí con nosotros. Un poquito nuestro background. Obviamente vamos a hablar del escenario político ahorita en inglés entre México y Estados Unidos, pero también la parte importante del comercio exterior, como me toca liderar la Comisión de Asuntos para América del Norte de CAREM. CAREM es la Confederación de Asociaciones de Agentes Aduanales de la República Mexicana, que tiene pues la representación de todos los agentes aduanales de México, y pues con ellos hacemos un trabajo muy importante en la región de América del Norte. Well, it's a pleasure for me to be with you all. Thank you all for the invitation, and we will talk about the U.S.-Mexico political scenario. And I put the 1982-2020 framework, this window time frame, because I do believe is one of the most important and challenging times we have lived. Why? Because in 1982, we had the NAFTA. NAFTA was signed, even though it was until January the 1st of 1994 when it began into force. NAFTA was this first effort of the North American region of Canada, US, and Mexico to be together. We have to remember that U.S. and Canada, they have previously have a free trade agreement with the both countries, but Mexico entered after a series of important negotiations in the early 1990s. And it was very important because Mexico then became part of this great region, our region. And the most important thing is to understand what has happened in the political scenario, in the political spectrum during these years. Because if we want to understand what is happening right now with the USMCA and what will happen in the future in our region, we have to go back a little bit to understand what has happened during these important years. Adelante. Okay, the US-Mexican relationship. It's a complex relationship beyond trade. Why I say this? Because we cannot understand our dynamic as a border region, our dynamic as neighbors, only we see a relationship, an economic relationship, a relationship of trade, or even though a relationship of investment. No, our relationship is much complex. It's a very, very interesting relationship because we have different landscapes, we have different realities in our countries, and all of this are a matter of importance in what we have as a region. It is not only about trade flows, as I say, it is not only about investments, it's about competitiveness, it's about trade facilitation, but it's much more. It's about family ties, about history. It's about migration, labor, security. It's about technology, about education. It's about rule of law. It's about infrastructure. One of the main aspects, and is the most important thing as people, as we are professionals who are working in economic development, infrastructure is essential for our region. But also a concept I like a lot, which is border administration. And border administration is only successful if it's in a binational approach. And I think that's why our relationship as neighbors, as allies, is a very complex relationship, and it's beyond trade. That's definitely, and that's what we are going to see in this in this webinar. I think Victor will talk about a little bit more about the USMCA, but this is really, really important. Okay, next, and this is where it began the fun part. NAFTA. NAFTA is a story of success. And why I say this? Because not only we are now talking about a new agreement, but the past 28 years and the past 26 years, the Mexico, US, and Canada have had good economic years and a very good relationship. We have been partners, and we have been successful in this partnership. And this partnership, this relationship, what NAFTA brought to our countries was not was macroeconomic stability, was understanding, was mutual respect, and was a clear set of rules. There's a lot of talk and debate about what a free trade agreement costs and what it can resolve. And many see a free trade agreement as the NAFTA was as the solution to all the problems. For example, in Mexico, we wanted to solve poverty, to solve inequality. And the free trade as NAFTA was not intended to do that. It was intended to foster economic relationship, to foster investments, to foster trade. But it was not, the goal was not a goal to resolve the internal priorities or problems of Mexico, not in the US and not in Canada also. And this is something we have to take into account in order to understand what has been NAFTA for us. And for me, it is very important to understand that NAFTA was born under very difficult circumstances. And right now with the USMCA, it was also renegotiated, and it was an agreement that came into effect under very difficult circumstances. We have passed a lot of crises, political, social, economic, and also war crisis. Because, for example, in Mexico, We had the social crisis when the NAFTA began in 1994 with the Ejército Zapatista in Chiapas, and then we have a political crisis with the murder of the presidential candidate of the PRI, Luis Donaldo Colosio, and other political leaders. And then we have an economic crisis in the 1994 crisis, tequila crisis that is called, which was a great problem for Mexican economy that the United States bailed out, but also NAFTA had a lot of political problems in the U.S., and I will talk a little bit about that. When President Bush he lost his reelection bid in 1991, and in 1992, with President Bill Clinton from the Democratic Party, he came into effect, and he had the decision to continue with the NAFTA in order to NAFTA be approved by the U.S. Congress. And it was a difficult decision because Democrats and Republicans as well in Mexico, we cannot think alike, and we have many differences when we talk about trade. But this is interesting to understand. But another thing, and I want to pass adelante, please. Yes, this is very important. That's for me the most important thing. Why the NAFTA story is a story of success in the political spectrum. See the chart. In the US, 3 Republican presidents, 2 Democrat presidents. In Mexico, 3 presidents from PRI, 2 presidents from PAN, Acción Nacional, a right party, and 1 from Morena. And even though we can think different, even though the policy priorities were different, the political platforms changed. Trade and regional integration had continued and had strength. And this is very important to talk. I was talking about the example when President Bush lost the election, and then President Clinton came into office, and he had this important decision of continuing with the NAFTA. But not only that, NAFTA has survived a lot of difficult challenges in our relationship. And 9/11 was also an important period because security, terrorism, all these concepts we are really familiar with because we have learned a lot about what has happened and what we have changed in the way border security has worked and in the way we have our trade flows to continue. Those challenges. NAFTA was the framework. NAFTA provided this certainty, this clear set of rules to follow, and that gave us what we have right now, which is a region that competes very well, that has been very successful, and that has preserved, no matter what a president party or political platform is, no matter the times, no matter what crisis, if it's political, if it's social, it's economic, if it's a world crisis, like right now, a pandemic, this clear set of rules that we know in the past of NAFTA and that we know in this present day as a USMCA continue to grow. And why is this important? Because this gives us certainty. If we want to understand this introduction about what the NAFTA has been and why we have right now the USMCA, we have also talked about a very special moment in history. When Donald Trump became president, we have a lot of uncertainty. But what happened? It was not only the relationships of the good relationship within one president or another, what kept not only NAFTA, but what allowed this renegotiation to be successful. And I believe, Veronica, we have a lot of to talk about what the renegotiation process was. But it was because we had more than 25 years of a complex relationship, of a diverse relationship, of an integration of our supply chains, and we have worked together. We have learned how to work together as a region, and that it's very important for us. That's very important for our present and for our future, and that was part of our past. And that's why the challenge, certainty versus uncertainty, is always important in the way we see and we analyze our relationship. Certainty, what is certain right now is that the US-Mexico has indissoluble ties. Our ties as neighbors, as allies, as partners, something that is certain and that will continue no matter what happened in an election, no matter what happened right now, because that's something that has worked in other previously crises, that has helped us to resolve crisis. We have to remember in 2008, the Great Recession, we continue and we recover of a great recession. So I do believe we have this, our ties, and obviously the rules that we have, a common set of rules help us to go forward always, no matter what challenge we have together. We always, with this set of rules, with the certainty of our relationship as a region, we can go forward and we can resolve our problems. But also uncertainty is something we have to talk. And uncertainty, what are the factors that we have right now also as uncertain in order to continue with this presentation? First, the players. Okay, obviously the U.S. election outcome we have two different scenarios. One is that President Trump reelects. This is one scenario, and the other one is that Joe Biden wins the presidency. Okay. Both candidates are different. They represent different things, different ideologies, and that's why I do believe we can have a little uncertainty degree on the policy approaches. We can expect, if Trump wins, that we can have what we have had the last 4 years or the last 3.5 years, and it's a very good relationship because he has understand well with President López Obrador in Mexico, and I do believe they think they can work together, or have this good understanding of mutual respect, even though the language of the President Trump is not a language of respect, but Mexican president has not any, he doesn't want to have any fight with President Trump. So we can predict the relationship will maintain the same, and that has been good because it has been this years of the renegotiation and of this new approach has worked for our region, and we know about it. But if Joe Biden wins, we also will have, I think, a positive outcome. I see both positive outcomes, even if Trump elects or if Biden is elected in November. And it's in the only change I can see is that a Biden-Harris administration can have a different approach in environmental issues, in labor issues, and also in the energy sector. That's something that has to be worked with the Mexican government, and I see that President López Obrador and our Canciller Marcelo Ebrard, they have the ability to work with anyone who wins in November, and I believe if Joe Biden wins, the Mexican government will achieve a common agenda with the Biden administration. But that's something that is uncertain right now, and this kind of different approaches they can work in different ways, and it's part of our relationship. It has happened in the past and will happen in the future. But also we have right now an uncertainty in what will happen with COVID-19. Because COVID-19 is not only a health crisis, it's now an economic crisis. And that's why the pace of the economic recovery is something that it's uncertain. It will be slow, it will be a quick recovery. How this recovery will be, I do believe we are in the best scenario, because even though this is uncertain, we have this new trade agreement, this USMCA into effect in this time. And that's why it will be a great challenge to meet the recovery, having this set of rules clear. If this will happen in the middle of renegotiation, it could have been more difficult. But right now we are in the best scenario as a region. We are in the best scenario as a with macroeconomic stability. And even though we're facing this life threat challenge that is COVID-19, I do believe we have a low degree of uncertainty, because it is more important what we have certain, and it's more important all this history that has worked well under NAFTA and right now in the USMCA, and all what we have learned as a border region, as a binational region, in order to have these challenges, in order to meet the challenges, in order to have a good future together. So this is just a little introduction of what has happened in the political spectrum. And the main things I want just to end with is that no matter what the president's ideology or what has happened in the different Congresses, what we have in Mexico, in the US, in Canada, no matter if it's right, if it's left, if it's center, the idea of working together, the idea of being a region, the idea of the North American region has prevailed. Obviously, we have challenges, we have threats, and we have to learn about the mistakes that we made in the past. But we have to work together. That's why the binational communities, the local communities, are the most important thing to preserve and to develop, because that's where the strength, not only of what NAFTA was and what the USMCA is, but our future as neighbors and as allies, that's where our strength resides, in the way we can work together and we can deliver results in order to have a better future. So that's what this introduction, macro introduction was for me. And I think Veronica will have a much better explanation of what the iniciativa privada has worked with all in Mexico, in the US, and Canada in order to all this be possible.
Verónica, el microphone.
Habilitar el micrófono. Gracias.
Listo. Listo. Thank you very much for the invitation and the organization this morning and for this space to talk about the role of the private sector in the USMCA renegotiation. So the next, please. I will start saying about what COMCE is. COMCE is the Mexican Business Council for Foreign Trade, Investment and Technology. And it is a private organization, a non-profit organization that was created in the 50s. At that time, COMCE was thinking about to help and to support companies to make business. And so then, I don't know, Victor, if you can move this slide, please, because I cannot see it. Ah, okay, no, that is the video. So then, when the COMCE was started, it was in the 50s, and under the head of the National Business Chamber, which is the CCE, which is the Consejo Coordinador Empresarial. This Consejo Coordinador Empresarial is the umbrella organization of COMCE that organize all the business and industry activities in Mexico. And this organization, for example, CCE is gathering all these organizations, and we can start by CONCAMIN, which is the Confederation of Industry in Mexico. There is the CONCANACO, Coparmex, and the Asociación de Bancos de México, also the Asociación de México de Casas de Bolsa, el Consejo Mexicano de Negocios. We can see here Canacintra, here is COMCE, and also we can see here the national industry of the maquiladora in Mexico. All these 12 organizations are gathered under the umbrella of COMCE. And then at the time when COMCE was created, it started with only one bilateral business committee, which precisely was the Mexican United States Business Committee. Up to date, COMCE has more than 60 bilateral business committees around the globe. And then, for instance, you can find the bilateral committee Mexico-Colombia, or Mexico-Chile, or Mexico-China, or Mexico-Korea, Mexico-Spain, and so on. By the way, it is important to mention that we have a bilateral committee between Mexico and Canada. So then, up to now, we have 60 bilateral committees, and the mission is to help businessmen to make business around the globe, and with the support of these counterparts in the world. Then, also, we have the mission to attract the foreign investment to Mexico, but also I can say that COMCE has a new task, which is the protection of the Mexican investments abroad. So there is a recent new committee working and protecting these investments abroad. And then also COMCE support companies, suggesting, develops joint proposals, advocates specific topics, and is a stakeholder of companies, and also present and increases the awareness of the private sector for business matters. So this is COMCE, a platform that helps and offers the community the participation for any kind of business facilitation and exports. So COMCE, during this renegotiation, we don't have to say, because Carlos has already mentioned, when the time of the renegotiation was imminent, so then you remember that the threat was to eliminate the NAFTA. So then the time to renegotiate and to open that NAFTA came into force. So the negotiation opened, and the organization between the private sector and the authorities, at that time it was the Ministry of Economy, they were collaborating very closely and all together communicating all the topics, and the organization was led by CONCAMIN, which we see here, and the CCE. And the way all these organizations and business and chambers of industry and commerce participate in the way that they endorse their membership to participate in this group, this famous Cuarto de Junto, or War Room, which was composed by many experienced and expert and lawyers with expertise and businessmen, that even many of them participated in the first round 26 years ago in the NAFTA negotiations. So you can imagine the experience and the expertise of all people participating in this Cuarto de Junto. So all these organizations here endorse their members to participate. COMCE endorsed around 25-30 businessmen and attorneys to participate with expertise in different topics. And they were accredited with a specific credential, and also they have to sign the secrecy of the information. It was confidential, the confidentiality of the agreement that related to non-disclosure of the information, because we can imagine the difficulties if someone were leaking information of the agreement when this agreement was open in the working tables that took around 2.5 years working. So it was very important, and the private sector was always compelling the information with the secrecy and having a very close support to the Mexican authorities. So even they were also traveling together to Ottawa, to Washington, in Mexico City, and not only in the rondas de negociación, but even in the previous working tables, which adelante, Victor, we can see that these working tables were very related to the last NAFTA and to the new USMCA. So there were organized through different topics. I will just mention some of them, like agriculture. These agriculture topics were led by the CNA, which is the Consejo Nacional Agropecuario, which were all these difficult topics about seasonality and the windows for export of Mexican agriculture goods. So it was a difficult topic that they had. Also, they reviewed the phytosanitary and sanitary rules. All these topics were led by CNA. And then we have some other working tables, like, for example, rules of origin, which concerns not only the automotive and auto parts sector, but also the chemicals and other industrial sectors which takes rules of origin. So that was a very hard job they took. And they have also the organization of many other tables like trade and facilitation or technical barriers to trade, investment, and for example, telecommunications and digital or the e-commerce. It was all the time organized together because telecoms and digital, they were coming by hand all the time. So these, of course, are were the topics of the new arguments in the new agreement. Labor, for example, was a new one also. Environment, SMEs, the small medium companies, which also it was a new topic included in the new agreement, and so on. Then there were many working tables, for example, also in property, in intellectual property, and there were anti-corruption. So this is the way the private sector organized all the topics and analyzed. They were given their suggestions, their recommendations. And I can tell you that through all these working tables, COMCE participated around in 12, 15, but there were around 30 working tables. So then in the tables I had the chance to participate, I can tell you that there were three words, next Victor, three words that they were always present during the negotiation, and which are the enforcement, which I don't think that we need a translation here, but is the enforcement of the law, to follow the rule, and an obligation to get the compliance, which is the obedience and to obey the law, for the accountability and to get the things done as we say. So all these three words were all the time present during all the working tables in any chapter, in any topic. Those were the words that they were present to get enforced all the time. So I would like to finish my presentation just saying that I would like to recommend you very much to take in mind and in consideration all the time, and not only in business, these three words: enforcement, compliance, and accountability. Because it doesn't matter how good is a trade agreement if the parts doesn't follow the rules and the compliance. So I will take 2 more minutes of your time, and if Victor, you can help me to present the video of COMCE. Oh my God, I cannot hear you. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you, Veronica. Very complete.
Thank you,
And
Victor.
as thank you very much. I'm just going to skip forward and get to my part of the presentation. Now, thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Carlos. And thank you, everybody, for the invitation. As Veronica and Carlos said, this is a work between a lot of private initiative and the public sector and government. As Veronica and Carlos participated in the Cuarto de Junto through the private sector side, along with our president in COMCE-Sonora, my dad, Victor Gamas, I was able to work, but on the public sector side, and worked with the Mexican Embassy's negotiating team in Washington, D.C., where I was able to look at all these issues closely. And it's been a pleasure to study how Mexico's GDP and Mexico's economy, better said, is tied to trade. As we can see here, since the entry into force of the USMCA in 1993, there was a very little trade in Mexico, and the GDP was relatively small. Now, as we see in 2019 and 2020, we have increased our GDP, but we have also increased our trade. And we see the flows here. Mexico's GDP is tied to Mexico's trade. This is a sign that Mexican exports especially play a large role in economic development for our country. And that is why the importance of a North America that is integrated through trade. Why? Because we are a region with 490 million people. We are a region that has a total GDP of $23 billion, and we have a trade that is estimated of $1.16 billion. Why Mexico and why North America? Well, primarily there is the largest region that Mexico trades with, but also Mexican exports go to the United States, 77% of it. This graph does a good job in showing how much of trade, how much of exports from Mexico go to the United States. We depend on the United States. We depend on North America, but also our imports come from the region. Here it's a little smaller, but it's still the large majority of it. More than half of imports to Mexico come from the United States, the second of which is China. So we have to take care of our region, and despite different political waves, our region remains strong and our economy remains tied. And that is something that Carlos did a good job in explaining. We are a region that is tied by 1,954 miles. These 1,954 miles are miles that gave life to people like Carlos and myself who are from the border. Cities like Yuma, Mexicali, Calexico, San Luis Rio Colorado, Tijuana, San Diego, who are all present here, who are from the border. These miles are what tie us. And despite the fact that we are far from Mexico City and far from Washington, D.C., we are the reason that this integration happens. And that is why it is important that we value these 1,954 miles. And that is the reason why we have to increase the dialogue about these issues in our border region. Mexico has 13 free trade agreements, and that accounts to having agreements with more than 50 countries. And even with this, presents an opportunity for us to diversify our trade to Asian, Middle East, African, Central American, South American countries, European countries, but even still, North America, as we saw, is our go-to. This is a graph that I wanted to show about how the U.S. Foreign direct investment to Mexico has increased exponentially since the NAFTA's entry into force. Now we have FDI that is rapidly growing, and nothing, not even recessions, not even pandemics, can stop it. Now, where do we find ourselves today? I think this is important for us to consider as we talk about the USMCA's entry into force. We are in the middle of a US-China trade war. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. We are experiencing growths, GDP growths that are beneath expected 6 to 8% levels, but also Mexico is expected to have their GDP decrease by the end of the year of 10%. We also have global trade that is decreasing. North American exports are decreasing by 17 to 41% in some industries. Now, why do I show this? The situation is poor, it's dire, yes. We're all living through bad times. But fortunately, we have an entry into force of the USMCA on July 1st of 2020 that provides clear and certain rules for us to go forward and present opportunities for us to take these crises, these moments of problems, to create them into opportunities. The US-China trade war is an opportunity for Mexico and North America to attract more investment. The increasing reliance on regional trade due to the pandemic is going to happen because supply chains are going to want to increase their regionalization, their concentration into their turfs, their home turfs, more than expand outside of where they're producing or selling. These are all opportunities for us to consider and for us to move forward as we enter into the USMCA. Now, what is the USMCA? The USMCA preserves the integration in North America. It maintains a free trade with clear rules. And it provides certainty for trade and investment. That is why we're all so excited about the USMCA. And what is in the USMCA? Well, it's 34 chapters. 10 are new. What are these 10 new chapters? We have facilitation in trade, sectoral annexes, e-commerce, labor, macroeconomic policies, best practices in regulation, anti-corruption, competitiveness, SMEs, and the environment. This is a very complex and complete trade agreement with 34 total chapters, and I've highlighted the 10 that are new. Now, today I want to talk about some specifically, and how I'm going to talk about them is by splitting them up. I think it's easier to understand the USMCA's chapters if we split them up into 3 categories. The first is regional competitiveness. This includes chapters like preferential access, regulatory cooperation, investment and certainty in your investment, temporary entry for merchandise, and cooperation for development. Also, we have an inclusive and responsible trade. This is the first trade agreement of its kind, the first trade agreement that Mexico, United States, Canada, and the world has seen that includes chapters on SMEs, on labor rights, on anti-corruption, on the environment, on e-commerce, as well as mentioning gender equality. And also, we have certainty and trade, certainty for trade and investment. We have this through chapters with for state-owned enterprises, dispute settlement, mechanisms for cooperation, competition, and government procurement. I'm going to dive into some of chapters specifically. The first is a national treatment and market access for goods. This is basically a commitment, again, by these 3 countries to not apply export tariffs for any of the exports that our countries participate in, and also eliminates performance requirements for duty exemptions on merchandise. Also, another very important region chapter for this region is agriculture, the 3rd chapter in the USMCA. This eliminates import subsidies, it patents formulas for prepackaged goods, and it provides protection for Mexican mezcal and tequila. Here, Mexico and the United States also are committed, and this is an opportunity for our region, to establish a technical working group that meets annually to review these matters on agricultural classification, quality standards, technical specifications, and other standards that the countries may want to talk about due to the application and implementation of this chapter specifically. And also we have customs administration and trade facilitation, something that is very important to our region, something that establishes mechanisms for cross-border trade coordination, and that will help speed up the processes for us to have more efficient trade. There are also opportunities for the 21st century in the USMCA. What are they? The first is intellectual property. Intellectual property is important because it provides more security for the production of goods and services that our people in our 3 countries provide. It provides more checks, it provides more clearance mechanisms, and it ensures that products and services stay with us and that there is no illegal trade practices. Also, we have e-commerce as an area for opportunity in the 21st century. This is chapter 19, as Veronica said, and this is an important part of this new agreement as it strengthens data protection and cybersecurity. It excludes any tariffs applied to e-commerce goods and increases the de minimis This provides the chance for companies like Amazon, Alibaba, Mercado Libre to participate more freely in our region, and for us as individuals to also participate in e-commerce with the certainty that our goods can now be traded and fluctuated between our three countries. These three countries are the first to establish a set of rules through this chapter with the e-commerce chapter in the trade agreement. Mexico, for example, does not even have an e-commerce law. So this chapter 19 will become the guideline through which Mexican e-commerce especially participates in. We've seen e-commerce increase exponentially through these past pandemic months, the 5 months, 6 months that we've been in this pandemic. We've seen an increase of what we expected to happen in 5 years to happen in 5 months. So this is relevant today, even more so than it was relevant when this was negotiated 2 years ago. And finally, financial services is another chapter of relevance that provides opportunity for fintechs, for a vast majority of people that send their remittances from abroad to Mexico, for people that want to innovate in the fintech industry, for people that want to have certainty in their banks and their money protections throughout the region. And so this chapter also is a new one that provides opportunities for us going forward. I want to touch specifically on the SMEs chapter, which is chapter 25. Here we have small and medium enterprises that are for the first time included in a trade agreement. And this is very innovative as it promotes spaces for cooperation for small and medium enterprises to develop. Each country is obliged to provide these spaces. Each country is obliged to provide these resources. And it also incentivizes their participation in value chains so that SMEs can participate in being procurement for these larger manufacturers and for them to grow through e-commerce or through procurement. And this is important because we've seen that SMEs in the three countries are a large majority of those that are exporting, but their value in what they export is very, very low. For example, in the United States, we have 93% of all companies that export being SMEs. However, they only represent 14% of all the total exports. There is massive amounts of growth. On the other hand, Mexico has 56% of their companies that exports be SMEs, but they only represent 5% of the value of their exports. We see the same numbers in importing, similar numbers when companies are importing goods. This provides in Mexico specifically, where SMEs represent 92 to 95% of the total GDP of the country and the total employers of the country, to participate so that they can grow, so that they can last more than 2 to 5 years, so that they can expand and show great goods like artisanal goods, local goods, to larger amounts in a larger market through trade. There's also the environment chapter, which is relevant to our region, as it obliges the parties to maintain and implement laws and regulations to care for the environment, as we live in a very beautiful area in the northwest of our country, in the southwest of the United States. It also establishes mechanisms to share information that ensures the legality of flora and fauna, fishing, and wildlife cargo. This is a vast improvement of what was accorded to in the USMCA, or the NAFTA, in 1994. And then we also have dispute settlement, the first of its kind, as we now have a dispute settlement mechanism within our region that ensures that panels will be readily available for our companies that have any complaints to address them with the authority. This is especially true in labor, as we have the United States send their labor attachés to Mexico and also implement a dispute panel to ensure that Mexico's labor reform, which increases democratization of labor unions and increases participation in them through this new agreement. We also have issues to watch that are going to be important, and that Robert Lighthizer of the USTR, as well as the Mexican Ministry of Economy, has already pointed that we're going to be seeing issues come up within the next months. The issues to look at that are important are biotechnology, like glyphosate. We have a massive amount of agriculture in our region, and that is being impacted by moves that the Mexican government is taking. So now we have the ability for the United States to protect their investments in Mexico and to protect against any changes in biotechnology that may harm our investments. We also have the complaint of agricultural seasonality, a thing that came up even in the Arizona legislative cohort in Washington, D.C. in the past month as an issue that we're complaining about. We also have the issue of telecommunications. We have to ensure that the telecommunications reform of 2013 is respected, as well as energy, as we've seen that the Mexican federal government take changes in their policies that only strengthen CFE and Pemex. And how can we, as investors in Mexico, ensure that our investments are respected and not be upholded or not be taken away? And we also have labor, as mentioned. Finally, the rules of origin are also new. This increases the rules of origin in our region so that 75% of the content in a light vehicle is made in the region. Steel is 70%, aluminum 70% as well. And also this very important part, which is the labor value content, which is something that I worked on closely when I was in the Mexican embassy in Washington, D.C. There we saw that the unions in the United States began complaining that labor was flocking to Mexico. So there was a mechanism now that ensures that at least 40% of passenger vehicles made in the region have parts that with employers that pay their workers at least $16 an hour. There is questions about how Mexico can comply with that, and that is why we have the dispute settlement mechanism, that is why we have the labor attaches, that is why we have the new labor reform in Mexico. This can seem like a lot, but however, it also is an opportunity for investment that is abroad in Europe and Asia, elsewhere, to come to our region, to set up shop in places like Mexicali, like San Luis Rio Colorado, like Yuma, like Calexico. And there we can make these parts for the production of vehicles, like as the case with the Toyota manufacturer in Tijuana. What are the opportunities that we see? Well, most recently in the past months since the entry into force of the USMCA, we've seen reinvestment. We've seen reinvestment in Sonora with the Ford Bronco sitting up in Hermosillo. We also seen the BRP increasing their investment in Chihuahua. These are projects that as COMCE, we look very closely and are helping out with these projects as they set up shop and increase their investment into the region, and something that we believe will only increase in areas like ours, and that we should be seeking and attracting to our region. And finally, new investments. What are the new investments? Well, investments like renewable energy. Our region is known for these wind turbines, for solar energy. Let's use them and let's increase that type of investment in our cities so that we can not only have more jobs, better paying jobs, but also a cleaner energy matrix and a cleaner production of energy, as we've seen that non-renewable energy is coming to its complications. Other areas of investment are technology. Let's use the FinTech Association and the FinTech chapter within this USMCA so that we can increase our digital footprint, but also our e-commerce footprint, and see how we can increase our role in playing a part into forming the 21st century economy. Something that as COMCE, we are looking very closely, especially as it relates to supporting SMEs and these pymes, as we call them in Spanish. And finally, investments. How? Well, automobiles is an example that I just told you, but also we have a lot of new investments that we can see an increase in our region that we can attract in the manufacturing, in the maquila section, with these new certainty and investment rules and with these new specifications for rules of origin. What's next? There's a lot of information, but I think the most important part is participation. How? Being in these forums, being in these groups like the Greater Yuma Economic Development Council, like COMCE, like CAREM, like FORFANIDI, where we have an opportunity to participate with our community, to voice our concerns, and to bring them up with the channels that COMCE and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and others, the Arizona Chamber of Commerce, have with the authorities in both countries. We also have an opportunity to trade more. That is the most important part, to increase and use these new rules the government already gave us in order to us increase our footprint in this very, very important part of our development as a region. We also have to establish and generate value chains. These value chains that are going to be coming from China, that are going to be coming from Asia and from other regions of the world, to set them up here in our region so that our manufacturing, our agriculture, our energy production, among many other industries, are ensured to be here for the long run. Tech is also important, as mentioned, with a new e-commerce chapter, with new fintech opportunities. These are all areas where cities like Yuma and Tijuana and Mexicali, etc., can all participate in. That is the conclusion of our participation today. Thank you very much for the invitation, my friends. As we say in COMCE, we take the best of Mexico to the world and we bring the best of the world to Mexico. That is who we are, as Veronica showed us. That is who we are, as Carlos mentioned. And that is how we seek to expand our reach and our participation with these 5 groups present today. And we are very appreciative of the time that you've given us today. Thank you.
Al contrario, Víctor, Verónica, Carlos, muchas gracias a ustedes por presentar esta información tan importante, relevante sobre el TEMEC, la USMCA, como se conoce en los Estados Unidos. Agradecemos su tiempo y la información que han compartido. Pasaremos directamente a la sesión de preguntas y respuestas. Tenemos ubicadas 4 y permítanme solamente leerlas. So we will move forward to the Q&A session. We have 4 questions for our panelists. Let me check them. The first one, how can, before that, I know that Carlos already answered this, but I would like Carlos to say it on the microphone since some of our attendees are connected through phone only. All right? How can the USMCA try while the World Trade Organization is highly criticized? Does the USMCA depend on the World Trade Organization, or are they independent from each other? Carlos, please.
Well, thank you. Well, as I said, and I answered directly, I thought it was in the chat, in the webinar chat. Well, the USMCA is, as we said in the beginning of this webinar, and as a participation of Veronica and Victor Andre, we can see it's much more about trade. It's not only about trade. It's a very complex agreement that involves investment that involves different areas and priorities. So that is why it is different. It is different in the essence. Obviously, the U.S., Mexico, and Canada were part of the World Trade Organization, or the World Trade Organization, the WTO. And being part of WTO, you have to make some criteria, and you have a common background. And that background and that set of rules help us, and helps us also in the USMCA rules that we have, obviously in trade and for trade dispute. But the USMCA has this, as Victor Andre referred, this trade settlement, dispute settlement chapter, and these settlement rules, and we are interconnected. That's what I was saying. It's a complex also relationship, and it's our countries, we have to meet the criteria of World Trade Organization, obviously. But if we are in the USMCA area, we have to follow first the rules of the USMCA, and we have, and that's why it is different. And obviously, as a World Trade Organization, a lot and a big and a very ample set, not only of rules but of ideas and of priorities came. That's why it can be more criticized, but it is not less effective. It is different. It involves the whole world and how we regulate trade. But the USMCA is in a specific set of rules for our region, for our context, and for having trade among us as partners and as regional allies. That's the difference, and from that we can start having this kind of clues and this kind of elements to understand what it is different and why we cannot combine or put it in the same frame. Nasser, I think you are without audio.
That's true. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you. That question was made by Juan Catala. Next one, by Paul Berthley. What might happen to the USMCA if Florida growers are successful at getting seasonal import protection? Whoever wants to answer that.
Well, I can take a stab at that, Nasser. If Florida growers are successful in using seasonality in their growing, the dispute will be brought up by Mexico. They will advise the three countries that this is a violation of the USMCA, and there's a period of 85 days for the three countries to diplomatically solve this issue through conversation and to find an agreement. If there's no agreement by that 85-day period, then we will get into a panel of dispute, and that panel that is conformed by nominees that are third-party nominees nominated by each country, and some of which are not even Mexican, United States, or Canadian. They're international. This panel will then make a decision on the legality of the seasonality in trade in terms of the USMCA. And if they uphold the seasonality, then the three countries are obliged to respect it. But if the panel decides that this is illegal against the USMCA, then the panel, the United States will be obliged to block the seasonality in Florida.
Gracias, Victor. Siguiente pregunta, next question. Humberto Fierro said, we are not talking about Canada. Does this mean there is no sign of any kind of political risk?
Well, it is true. It is true. We talk a little bit about Canada, and we mentioned in previous talks also with Veronica that we talk very little about Canada. No, it doesn't mean there's no risk. It means that we have a preponderant relationship with the U.S. That's the only thing what it means. And we are learning to be this partner and this ally. And we have learned this past 28 years to be that with the U.S. and with Canada. But obviously, that geographical part, we're not that close to Canada, and that's why we feel that, and that's why we obviously not only not take differently, but we tend to prioritize the U.S. relationship, and more if we are in a border, because our neighbor, our counterparts, who we see our allies, our partners, are just across the river, for example, for me in Laredo, and obviously the border part, the border limits in Sonora or in Baja California. And it's not that it's not risk. I think is one of the lessons that the renegotiation of the USMCA brought to us. We tend or we were really comfortable with NAFTA, and we believe it will continue always. And then President Trump came and everything changed. And we have to work, with our local allies, with our representatives, with senators, and both sides of the aisle, with the Trump administration, in order to make this. But we have to work a lot more with Canada. We have to begin understanding Canada, because it's a different system. It's a parliamentary system, and it can involve serious risk. So, and obviously there have been trade disputes with Canada. And we have right now some trade disputes undergoing, and we have in the middle of the process, in Canada was in sometimes a little distant, because it's part of the nature. So I do believe we have to take more Canada into account. We have to learn more about Canada. We have to be more present with Canada, because they can be a political risk, and that's why we have to learn this, and we have to learn quickly. I think it's a very good reflection, and it's a task and a challenge that we have in order not only to talk about binational region, and not only to talk about the U.S. and Mexico relationship, but to talk about the North American region as a whole, and that includes Canada, obviously.
If I can interject, there are also opportunities in investment of Canada, and Veronica knows this very well, and I'm going to pass this on to her. But we're talking about investments in automobile, we're talking about investments in energy especially, and they're very interested in coming into Mexico and the region as a whole with these new investments. But I know that Veronica is very involved, so I'm going to pass on this microphone to her.
Well, thank you, Victor. I was just to mention that the not mentioning Canada very much this morning or during the USMCA, it is because mainly we have the long frontier with the States and the most economic relationship with them. And I can say you that seeing how the Mexican bilateral committee with the States and the Canada are working very differently, and I don't see any risk and political risk either. So the only risk I can evaluate is that Mexican companies are not taking very much on the amount of consideration they should take about Canada, because Mexican companies are looking mostly for the US market. And when I say in charge of North America, I say, please, we need to diversify markets. And I used to push them to look for the Canadian market, and there are quite a lot of opportunities. Certainly there are different regulations, little bit different, but with the agreement and following these new rules of law in Canada for certain products which are different, like wine and liquors, which are different from the States and in Canada. So we have just to look for a different, one more step to take in consideration to Canada, but Canada is open and the Mexicans should look more for doing business with that country.
Muchas gracias, Verónica, Carlos. La última pregunta viene dirigida para Víctor, pues fue una porción de su presentación. Is the next question, the last question, is related with foreign direct investment. It says, the slide you displayed that showed an increase from 1999 to 2020, what key industries attribute in this growth?
The key industry is maquila. Maquila is the main investment, especially in the north. And there is very interesting, Nasser, it's a good question because that's the easy answer. The complex answer now is to look at how can we diversify the investments that we attract to our region. And that is a quick question that we're going to be asking ourselves, especially under this López Obrador administration, where there are obviously a lot of hurdles. There's a new team, a new administration, a new ideology, but these problems are also opportunities. And what are those opportunities? Well, we know very well that we need to invest in our south and our southwest region of Mexico. Well, what industries are there for interest? There can be investments in tourism, there can be investments in manufacturing as well, there can be investments in energy, and we've seen that interest being there. And let's not only focus on the northern part of the country, which has been greatly benefited by the maquila industry, by the automobile industry, but also let's find ways where we can work proactively with the government in supporting that region that is so vastly underdeveloped when compared to the north that has benefited by the NAFTA. And so this, what I wish I had done better in that graph was to show the inequality in that investment. And that inequality in investment has been mainly concentrated in our region. And obviously that benefits us. But as a country, we need to do a better job to look after our counterparts or our friends, our brothers and sisters in Chiapas, in Yucatan, in Quintana Roo, in Campeche, in Oaxaca, Guerrero, Michoacán, Puebla, all of these regions that are very, very important for all of us and have a lot to offer. And I think that is one key part that we are going to be asking ourselves in COMCE, how we can support them within this new rules of the USMCA, and especially with the next 4.5 years of a Morena government and possibly even more.
Thank you, Victor. Before we wrap up, one more question came through. So I will read it, whoever wants to answer it, okay? It says, do you have a positive outlook on Chinese industries reshoring and establishing themselves near our US-Mexico border communities? Who wants to answer that?
I can, and also I'll let Carlos, I know that he's interested. I would say yes. I would say yes. Why? Because we're looking, depends on the Chinese companies. There are multiple types of Chinese companies, but there are also American companies that have their manufacturing in China, as well as Mexican companies. So there are two segments of which where we can attract that investment. We know very well that Marcelo Ebrard, our Secretary of Foreign Relations, is working closely with China to attract investment. In COMCE, we have a committee that is a counterpart to Veronica's that works with Asian countries to attract them. And we've been very successful, thankfully. Obviously, we hear about Huawei, we hear about TikTok, we hear about WeChat security threats, but there are also other manufacturers that are just seeking to increase their investment. For example, automobile production in China is rapidly increasing, and they look in Mexico as a country where parts can be distributed and where parts can be produced for them. There are other forms that we can work with them, as is the case of Alibaba in Sonora. We've started a program working with Alibaba to attract that e-commerce and that platform to our citizens, to have that access to products from China. So there are different forms where we can collaborate on a safe and secure network, but also for the benefit of our region.
Muchas gracias. Agradecemos enormemente a los asistentes, a quienes nos han acompañado a lo largo de esta serie de webinars. Thank you so much for all the people that is connected from Yuma, San Luis Rio Colorado, Ensenada, Mexicali, Tucson, Phoenix, todos nuestros amigos en la Ciudad de México, Monterrey, Hermosillo, Tucson, Nogales, en ambos Nogales. Gracias por acompañarnos, a la gente de San Diego. Gracias nuevamente, tengan muy buen día, un saludo, un abrazo a todos. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you very
Muchas
much.
gracias.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.